Welcome to Under the Rug at Work, where I shine light on problems that are normally swept under the rug. Today, I'm chatting with Renee Burkinshaw about leaders behaving badly. Renee is the founder and director of Originate Coaching and Consulting, where she supports leaders to drive change, build inclusive leadership, and inspire high-performing workplaces. Thanks for joining me, Renee.
Thanks so much for having me, Nicole.
You're welcome. I love your background and experience because it's in the safety industry, in people and culture. So you know your stuff. You've been in those industries for over a decade. What have you seen leaders walk past that causes harm to the culture or to individuals?
It's an interesting one because sometimes we always just go straight to the big ones: discrimination, bullying, and harassment. And it's actually the smaller micro challenges and behaviors that actually build up to what becomes more of an issue. And so today I actually would love to share with you some smaller things that actually sometimes people will constantly walk past thinking that that's just how people are or what would actually be acceptable. So rather than the really big chunky ones that usually would require an investigation, and other behaviors and expectations as a result of those investigations, it's the smaller stuff that we'll share.
Yeah.
So a couple of those examples include a lack of investment. So really thinking about holding people back, creating whether you call it a glass ceiling or sometimes it can be even feeling like a concrete ceiling, we can actually feel really squashed by an inability to actually grow, to change, to evolve, and just to be invested in as an individual. Favoritism is another one where you actually see direct or indirect bias being applied to making decisions. So whether that is about projects, whether that's about promotions, that people through favoritism and bias will actually create, these challenges and impacts. Another one is also replicating poor behavior, where you'll actually see that those up the chain from an organizational structure perspective may be behaving in a certain way. They might come out onto the office floor in an open workplace environment or in a meeting or a forum and actually be quite verbally abusive, directly or indirectly. They might be behaving in a way that others will be uncomfortable about, but given their status and their role, others feel really, really agitated, but also unable to call out those behaviors. Another couple, gaslighting. Now, I know that we use that word a lot, but unfortunately, it occurs way too much, especially when it comes to making others believe that they've actually thought or done something that actually hasn't existed. And so some of that really does then connect back to that emotional and psychological abuse that can happen around, gosh, am I sane here? Am I actually thinking and behaving and, reacting in this organization in a way that I believe that I am? Are they listening and then acting, or are they just, seeking to be heard? And then the final one is actually really around claiming other people's work. So I always like to say, hey, let's throw somebody under the bus if the work wasn't of the quality or it didn't necessarily meet those expectations, but just generally claiming work as your own when it's something that is of a higher quality is really depreciating when it comes to, behaving badly in the workplace and for people to really feel disengaged.
Yeah, I've had that happen to me in a public meeting. And I went, and you sound really silly if you go, well, hang on a minute, that wasn't you. I did that.
Yeah.
But it's about how you do that. Never sit back and let someone take credit for your work. But yeah, I've seen all of those things. And often when I share with people what I do for work, I get horrific stories. So for example, when you talk about favoritism, it happens a lot. And I've heard too many times to count, I don't like that person.
Yeah.
And I don't understand what liking someone has to do with anything in the workplace. We should all be professional, but you do see favoritism happen where someone does like someone. And I've seen an instance where someone has gone from below someone else's pay grade and been promoted to 2 or 3 above because they are friends with a particular person in a senior executive role, and everyone else saw it as well. There were people in there in between those levels that just said, why wasn't anyone given a chance or an opportunity? So what happens when a leader doesn't take action when it comes to these harmful behaviours?
Well, the immediate things that also always come to mind is, gosh, it's engagement, it's performance, it's attrition. We're talking about, quiet resigning, or, the quiet quitting. Actually, this is actually something that is not a new situation. This is actually something that is directly linked to a number of behaviors. You've probably seen quotes where they say people don't leave organizations, they leave their leaders. And those leaders are usually the ones that have, as we've discussed in some of those previous examples, pulled out at least a couple, or unfortunately sometimes all, of those at any given time. And it's really had a huge impact on people's level of engagement, whether they're satisfied to work in that organization. And then that has an impact on their performance. So when people are feeling as though that there is favoritism, other people are claiming their great work, potentially there's self-limiting beliefs that are being imposed on others, you're not going to get the best out of people.
Why do you think they don't take any action, or they don't behave properly?
And it's funny because I know we've been talking about, the behavior you will pass is the behavior that you accept. And I was thinking about this leading up to today's session and thought about the word fear. And I find that a lot of the time, many of these behaviors, whether it is in a leader or if it's, in an employee, fear is really at the core. And I love the acronym for fear. I would like to share it with you. So fear is false expectations appearing real. And so there those elements around, am I driven to be liked? Do I want to please? Am I concerned about my reputation, my credibility as a leader, if I do or don't do certain things, whether it is calling out behaviors of others or even self? And then this ongoing concern about performance management. If all of a sudden I'm going to be holding somebody accountable or not holding them accountable, is it going to impact me? Or conversely, is it that I'm actually going to be, subject to a workers' compensation claim and someone's going to be alleging bullying because I'm effectively managing performance? So there's a range of these things that seem really big and scary, that they can certainly be reined in if we're really starting to be more mindful and cognizant of our behaviors every single day. And creating more of a psychologically safe workplace where people can say, actually, that's not okay. And that people don't see it as a personal attack, but that objectively, we're actually thinking back to our values. So another little diagram that I'd love to share with you is actually about the intersection of what are the tasks or the performance, the work that we actually do. And then if we think about the relationships that we have. Now, you need to find a healthy balance between task and relationship. Underpinning all of that really is your values. And so have those three intersections. The very small little triangle in the middle is our behavior. So depending on what it is that's actually pulling us in which direction is what type of behavior is going to come through. So if we're more task orientated, is it purely that we're more perfectionistic and we're more highly critical? Or is it more of a relationship where potentially we're actually motivated to please others and have this desire to be liked? So thinking about our own personal values is really going to help us in directing our leaders in understanding, well, what is acceptable and what's not acceptable, and how do they find the courage to speak?
I found in my history, not only my personal history, but when sharing with others what I do and their stories that come out, is that there's that huge values misalignment. So the way one leader behaved is considered completely inappropriate towards 95% of probably the population. But obviously they felt okay and thought it was appropriate to do. Let me give you an example where this organization, as many do, they want to find out from staff what's going on, what's the culture, and they do a survey. So they survey their staff. It's going to be anonymous, of course, and you can identify, pockets of positivity and pockets of areas that need improvement. When the results came in for this particular person's group, they printed it out, came out of their office and said, "What is this? No one's leaving until I find out who said this," from the people that were in the group when they received that. they were afraid to say anything ever again.
Clearly, they've had a mirror moment
Mm.
where all of a sudden it's been held up in front of their face. They've read it in black and white on a piece of paper to say, this is how people perceive you
Yes.
at this point in time. And it was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that feedback is never supposed to be comfortable. It's always supposed to help us shift in this space of going, okay, what am I doing that I could improve on? And what do I need to keep doing? So what are my strengths in that space?
Yes.
If we worry too much and focus too much on these, aggressive or passive aggressive tendencies, it's actually going to distract us from making the right choices around those behaviors.
Exactly. And it showed they didn't care what the opinion was. They weren't open to feedback, and there was no way that they would change. And they didn't. But that's what we get paid the big bucks for, to lead people, is to lead and empower and take that on and improve so that you can get more out of your team. And yeah, unfortunately, the story around that individual only got worse. So what are some of your top tips to help leaders make change?
And it's interesting because we've just been talking about feedback. I always like to flip it and think it's actually, rather than feedback, it's feed forward. And so the offering of feedback is really something that you're going to sort of look at retrospectively and say, well, what's actually happened? What was the impact on me, on others, and what can you do? Feed forward is really around, these are the things that I see are your strengths. These are the things that actually are the behaviors or elements that are actually going to continue to support you in being successful and performing in the future. And it also then opens the opportunity for leaders to even ask, how is it that I can support you to do more of that? And so there's an opportunity here to sort of flip it and flip the script. Instead of thinking about it's always going to be constructive feedback, it's more of, well, what is the gift in this feedback? And even if it is constructive, what are the gifts that we're giving one another? And how is it that I can use that objectively to support me to be successful moving forward? So the whole concept of, 360-degree feedback, I'm a huge advocate for that, because I think that if you have a level of readiness and willingness to be able to hold up that mirror and think about that level of self-awareness through other people's perspective at any given point in time, it will help you. It will guide you. And again, it's objective. You can pick it up or you can leave it behind. The choice is yours as a leader. And that takes courage. How do I actually find the courage? So what are those, embedded values and morals within myself around what is it that I will and will not accept? And thinking that you can change the whole world or thinking a whole organization is kind of a little far-reaching. So I would suggest think smaller. So think immediately with your own team or your own leader or potentially your peers as a leader. How is it that I can be more courageous with them or just that one person? And actually tell them, I'm practicing the skill of being able to speak up. I want to be more courageous when it comes to calling out something that doesn't feel right. And so if you're practicing this in a safe space, they'll know what's going on. So it's not going to be random and very strange. They'll be able to say, give you feedback in the moment and actually give you those gifts saying, actually, you did that really well. Or, pause at this point for effect, whatever it might be, that you've got this safe space to practice. If you don't necessarily have that with someone in your team or your peers or your own leader, I would, if it's just having a chat with a HR practitioner or someone else that actually has a background in that space to be able to say, well, I understand the policies. Yes, granted. What are the behaviors? And bringing then the organizational values to life for those behaviors is really important. I always like to sort of think about, it's really coming into the heart work around values, around courage, around determining what is and is not okay, and understanding what do I stand for. Because until such time as you know that as an individual, what do you stand for, it can be very difficult to be able to stamp out any of those behaviors, either that you're doing yourself and hearing feed or feeding forward around those behaviors, or if you see it in others. And is that something that you are willing to walk by and accept?
Yeah, I love that. And morals and values have always driven my behavior and my response to others. And I love that suggestion of I'm practicing this. So that automatically deflates things, and I think puts the person hearing that into more of a supportive and a helpful role rather than a reactive role. if a leader feels hurt or they've received feedback that makes them react, what can they do to alter things slightly so that they don't cause more harm and can grow with it rather than react from it?
And it's a tricky one. In the moment, there's always a likelihood that people, being human beings, are likely just to react. But what I'm imploring is that people would actually pause and respond. And so to do that, sleep on it. I know that it's an old coin term around just go and sleep on it, but you actually have the ability to control those moments. It is happening in the moment. You also have the authority and permission to say, this is actually something that I need to think about. Let's reconnect tomorrow because I really need some time to think about it. That's okay. You have the ability, again, courage to be able to speak up around what is and is not okay. If you feel as though you're being triggered, having that courage to say, I need some time to think about how I'd like to respond to this particular situation, that's perfectly fine. And that's highly respectful. Probably another tip that I would also offer is to really have a chat with somebody that you trust. Open yourself up to really understanding what is my internal dialogue? What is the story that I'm telling myself? And knowing that that other person, rather than just someone that you're venting to, is someone that can also challenge you. So when it comes to that trust, that two-way conversation of saying, well, if you were to choose path A, and if that's the only path, what would be the impact? How would you feel as a result of taking those steps? Now, what other options do you have? And then on measure, how do you actually want to be seen? So if you're thinking about if it's a reputational fear that they have, what would be the impact on, and call it out, your reputation if you selected path A versus path B or path C? And so just having somebody to bounce these ideas off in a very safe way, you have the ability to make more of an informed choice based on how you want others to see and perceive you.
Yeah.
And so if you're not happy with your 360 feedback, it's not a great idea to just react in a way that people have already identified if you really didn't like what it is that you saw and how it is that's making you feel. So again, taking that time to be courageous, to really think about those options and to start working with somebody that can provide you with support, but also effective challenge.
Love it. Have courage to do something different and be better. Thanks for joining me, Renee. I really appreciate your time. If you want to learn more about Renee, visit originatecoachingandconsulting.com.au.